Hello again, it's John Hind, Compass Resolution. I'm moving swiftly on to cover the second aim of this webinar, which you'll see from the slide in front of you, or behind me, I should say, is the workbook overview. Just let me get out of your way first. By now, my hope is that you've had a look at the workbook to give a bit more meaning to what I'm going to be talking about in this webinar. When Bob and Jane open their workbook, they'll see the following content. They'll see an introduction, and they'll read an overview of the whole workbook, and they'll look at the overview of the 4 building blocks of need. I provide an overview of the 4 decision-making components and the 7-step process. And at the heart of the book are the 4 building blocks they're going to be working on, applying the 7-step process to each of the building blocks, putting it all together at the end of the workbook to create some integrated options covering the 4 basic or building blocks of need. Now, the workbook is suitable for simplest or some of the more complex financial situations, and people use it in many different ways. So Bob tells me that he should be fine to work his way through the workbook using the videos and guides for support. That's enough for him. And Jane tells me that having watched some of the videos, she would like a bit more personal support. So she's working with one of our financial coaches to develop her financial options using the workbook. As I say, separating couples take different approaches to preparing for the first mediation session using our workbook. The workbook is simply a tool and a resource to help Bob and Jane stay focused, developing some financial options, building their competence and confidence, ready to work together as mediation approaches. I can always tell which of my clients have made good use of the workbook. They're the ones who come to mediation with clear, well thought through options and confident, ready to explain these. If both the couple come to mediation well prepared, ready to work together with their options and workbook, the whole process is that much quicker, cheaper, and much more effective. So let's take a closer look at the model and the 7-step process. The workbook is based on a 7-key stage process, applying 4 building blocks of financial needs. So 7 stages, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, applying to each of the 4 building blocks of need: housing needs, income needs, children needs, and retirement needs. The workbook and the 7-stage process follows a top-down approach, beginning with Bob and Jane establishing key objectives for each of the building blocks of need, followed by establishing a framework of legal principles to guide their work and application of their priorities and key factors to create some options. There are exercises and questions at each stage to help Bob and Jane remain open, curious, as they create their options to develop further in mediation together. There are also guides, case studies, and professional expert support as Jane and Bob work on each of their building blocks as and when needed. Now, it's not necessary for them to work through each of the 4 building blocks of need in the order they are presented in the workbook, namely house, income, children, and retirement. Some people find it more helpful to start with looking at case studies, for example, whereas others prefer to follow the step-by-step top-down approach for each of the blocks of need in order. There's no right or wrong. It's a case of whatever works best for each person, and we're all different, of course. The aim is for Jane and Bob to come to mediation with some options to discuss together, which have been carefully thought through, structured, and recorded using their workbook and the financial options model, maintaining an open, curious, flexible mindset and approach at all times. Let's now turn to the heart of the workbook, the 4 building blocks of need, and remind ourselves of some of the key resources and factors for Bob and Jane. So let me quickly have a look at this slide. Now, the aim of dividing the workbook into these 4 building blocks of need is to create 4 manageable chunks for Bob and Jane to work on, providing them with a structured framework for their thinking and reasoning, to provide a tool on which to record and track their thinking and their reasoning as they develop their options in preparation for mediation and in between mediations as more financial information comes to light and discussions take place. It also provides them with an opportunity to build confidence and competence in themselves and the process as they approach mediation, ready to use their workbook to share, develop, and expand on their options. Remember the 4 key questions that Bob and Jane had at the start, which I've covered. They asked themselves, where are they going to live in the short, medium, and long term, their housing needs. They asked themselves, how can we afford to live in the short, medium, and long term, their income needs? How are we going to support our children's needs in the short, medium, and long term, their children's needs? And how are we going to have a half-decent retirement when the time comes, their retirement needs? And I set out an overview of the resources available to Jane and Bob relevant to each of the building blocks. So you'll see for housing, I set out the resources available here. For their income needs, to meet those income needs, I've set out their income resources here, pensions here, and so on. You can take a bit more time if you want to, have a look at that, freeze the video, and so on. And indeed, you've got their case study as well. From these resources, Bob and Jane are going to have to create options and ultimately reach an agreement together in mediation, remembering their stated aim at the start, which is to reach fair financial outcomes together, which meet enough of their priority financial needs, housing, income, children, and retirement, from the resources available to them, future and present resources available to them, which is fair in all the circumstances, fair applying the legal principles, their priorities, and the factors. So finally, as part of the workbook overview part of this webinar, the second aim, let's turn to the 4 key decision-making components applying to each of these 4 building blocks of need. So the 4 decision-making components also provide Bob and Jane with a structured framework for their thinking and approach, ensuring that as they work on each of the 4 building blocks of need, they have clear objectives based on positive intent and a shared purpose, providing them with a focus and, of course, motivation to get the job done. It also provides them with the legal principles applying to their situation, and it provides them with a legal framework to guide their work. So their principles provide them with a framework within which to work and apply their objectives and priorities. They also need to be clear about their priorities, their specific priorities and shared priorities, shaping their thinking and approach, and why these are important to them as they look at each building block of need. And finally, on the 4th component, they need to be thinking about how key factors in their situation shape their approach, and to do all this in a methodical, structured way using the workbook. In the next video, I'll focus on my 3rd aim for this webinar, how to apply the 4 decision-making components to the building blocks of need. And to do this, I'll focus on the particular building block housing needs, using the case study to show how Bob and Jane create some options to meet their future housing needs. I'll end this video for the moment and start a new video for the final 3rd aim of this webinar. See you in a minute. Thanks for watching. Stay with me.